Rain had a way of humbling everything in Atlanta. It softened the glare of streetlights, muffled the honking cars, and turned even the proudest towers into silhouettes. But that night, nothing could soften Isabella Morrow. The marble floor of Morrow Industries shimmered beneath her heels as she stormed down the executive hallway. Her reflection followed, tall, precise, every line of her body a statement of control. She was one of the youngest CEOs in the country, and the press called her the Ice Queen of Tech. It wasn't just about her beauty. It was her precision, her ability to make decisions without emotion. Behind her trailed a small group of assistants, struggling to keep up with her pace and tone. "Cancel my 8 p.m. dinner," she said flatly. "But ma'am, the investors from Zurich." "Cancel it." I said no distractions. When Isabella entered the boardroom, everyone stood. The air smelled of coffee and tension. On the glass wall behind her was the city skyline, rain streaking down like a painting in motion. At the far end of the table sat David Cole. He looked out of place, not because of his dark skin among the pale suits, but because of the quiet intensity in his eyes. He wasn't just another engineer. He was brilliant, daring, and dangerously honest. He rose respectfully. "Ms. Morrow," he began, "I need to bring something to your attention before this meeting starts." "Not now, Cole," she said, waving him off. "It's urgent. It concerns the data audit from your finance division." The others in the room shifted uncomfortably. Isabella's brow tightened. "Then make it quick." David held up a file. "I found discrepancies, millions unaccounted for. If we don't address this, it could turn into a major scandal." Silence. The head of finance, Richard Hale, coughed softly, his eyes flickering with nerves. Isabella turned toward him, then back to David. "You're accusing my executive of fraud?" "I'm saying something isn't right. We can't afford to bury it," David replied. Isabella's tone went cold. "And you have evidence?" "I'm gathering it." "Then you have nothing." Her voice cut through the air. "Do you have any idea how reckless this sounds? Accusing senior staff without proof." David's jaw clenched. "I'm trying to protect this company, Ms. Morrow. Your name." "My name doesn't need protection from you." A faint murmur ran through the room. Isabella's assistant whispered something to her, but she ignored it. All eyes were on her, the queen defending her throne. "Effective immediately," she said. "You're suspended pending investigation." David froze. "Suspended? For doing my job. For crossing boundaries," she replied coolly. "You don't investigate your superiors. You report through channels." He stared at her, anger and disbelief colliding in his eyes. Then, slowly, he set the file on the table, his voice trembling with restraint. "I thought integrity mattered here." Isabella didn't flinch. "It does. Which is why we can't tolerate accusations built on emotion." The room went still again. David took a deep breath, his pride shaking but unbroken. He removed his ID badge and placed it next to the file. "One day you'll see who's really lying to you," he said quietly. "And when that day comes, I hope it's not too late." Then he turned and walked out, head high, back straight, as if refusing to let her see how much it hurt. When the door closed, Richard Hale exhaled in relief. Isabella said nothing. She stared at the glass wall, the rain now heavier, the city lights fractured into ripples. "Ma'am," Richard murmured. "He's a good engineer, but these types, they don't always understand how corporate systems work." Isabella gave a small, icy smile. "Handle it quietly. I don't want his name on any lawsuit. Just make sure the board knows it's resolved." Richard nodded, hiding a smirk. Within a week, David Cole's name was everywhere, but not as a whistleblower. As a thief. Former Morrow engineer accused of embezzlement. The headlines read, "His apartment was raided, his accounts frozen, his fiancée left him. In one brutal sweep, his life collapsed." And Isabella? She barely remembered it. To her, it was one more crisis managed, one more problem contained. But on quiet nights, when the rain fell hard against her penthouse windows, she sometimes thought about his face. That moment when truth stood against pride. And felt something she couldn't name. The following month, Morrow Industries announced record profits. Investors cheered. But inside those numbers, buried deep beneath polished presentations and stock market smiles, a secret festered. One that would return years later to dismantle everything Isabella thought she was. 3 years later, the sound of waves against stone carried through the open windows of Cape Town's coastal skyline, blending with the hum of luxury cars and the laughter of guests gathered outside the one and only hotel. The evening was warm, the kind of soft, windless dusk that made the Atlantic shimmer like molten glass. Inside the hotel ballroom, chandeliers glowed golden over polished marble floors. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. It was the Global Tech Innovation Summit, a gathering of some of the world's most powerful investors, politicians, and business leaders. Isabella Morrow was among them, dressed in a sleek silver gown that caught every light. Her blonde hair framed a face more refined than before. Beautiful, yes, but tempered by time and quiet anxiety. 3 years had changed her world. After a series of scandals, Morrow Industries had fallen into decline. Richard Hale, the same man she had once defended, had vanished after draining millions from the company's reserves. Isabella was left to rebuild from the ashes, her once iron confidence replaced by calculated calm. She had come to Cape Town searching for new investors, a final chance to save her legacy. "Ms. Morrow," said a voice behind her, smooth and deep, "they're about to start the keynote. You'll want a good seat." She turned to see a young assistant smiling politely. Isabella nodded and followed him into the main hall. As she stepped into the grand auditorium, her eyes widened. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured, the lights dimmed. A tall figure walked onto the stage, and the world went still. The screen behind him read, "Keynote speaker, David Cole, CEO, Cole Dynamics." For a moment, Isabella thought it was a mistake, a name, a coincidence. But when he spoke, his voice made the air itself tremble. 3 years ago, he began, "I lost everything, my job, my reputation, and my freedom, but I learned something powerful, that no one can steal your truth unless you let them." The room fell utterly silent. Isabella's heart pounded. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The man standing on stage wasn't broken or bitter. He was transformed, powerful, magnetic, elegant in a dark tailored suit. His beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes sharper than she remembered, glowing with quiet confidence. The once disgraced engineer had become a visionary. He continued, "When I was accused of theft, I thought my life was over. But sometimes destruction is a doorway. I went home to the soil that raised me and built something that couldn't be taken away. Cole Dynamics is more than a company. It's a promise to those who were silenced." The audience erupted in applause. Isabella sat frozen, unable to breathe. Her chest felt tight, her throat dry. She didn't even hear the end of the speech. The image of David, alive, successful, commanding respect, shattered her sense of control. When he stepped off stage, she stood abruptly and slipped out a side door into the hallway, leaning against the wall, the world spinning. "Ms. Morrow?" a voice said behind her. She turned, and there he was. David stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. He looked at her the way a storm looks at the shore, calm but full of history. "David," she whispered, almost disbelieving. "You're alive?" he finished, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yes, that's usually the first question." Her voice trembled. "I thought you left the country after everything." "I did," he said, "but I came back with purpose." There was no anger in his tone, only gravity, that unnerved her more than any accusation could have. "David, about what happened back then." He raised a hand. "Don't," he said softly. "Not here." She froze, feeling the weight of the unspoken. David nodded toward the large terrace overlooking the bay. "Meet me there after the gala. If you want the truth, I'll tell you. But this time you'll have to listen." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her in the golden hallway, the echoes of his footsteps mingling with the hum of music and the roar of her own guilt. Later that night, the ballroom emptied into laughter and luxury cars. Isabella stepped onto the terrace as the city lights flickered beneath the mountain shadows. David was already there, standing by the railing, hands in his pockets, looking out toward the ocean. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly, not turning to face her. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "You told me to." He exhaled slowly. "Fair enough." For a long moment they stood in silence. The wind carried the scent of salt and jasmine. "I need to know," she said finally, her voice small. "Why did you come back into my world?" He turned then, his eyes steady. "Because the truth has a way of circling back. You remember Richard Hale?" Her stomach dropped. "Yes, he disappeared after the fraud." "He didn't disappear," David said. "He ran. But not before I found proof that he was the one stealing from your accounts. The same proof I tried to show you 3 years ago." She blinked, her throat tightening. "Proof?" He nodded and pulled a small drive from his pocket. "Everything you ignored. Kept it. When I rebuilt my company, I made sure every injustice I suffered became a lesson in how to do things differently." She stared at him, her breath shaking. "You could have exposed me, destroyed me." "I could have," he said simply. "But I didn't. Because you weren't the thief. You were the lesson." Her voice broke. "Then why? Why invite me here?" David's expression softened slightly. "Because I'm building something bigger than revenge. Coal Dynamics just acquired the international division of Morrow Industries. I want to see what you do when pride isn't your armor." Her eyes filled with disbelief. "You bought my company?" "Not all of it," he said. "Just enough to remind you how quickly power changes hands." She laughed, a brittle, trembling sound. "You wanted me to feel what you felt." "No," David said gently. "I wanted you to understand it." They stood in silence again, the city shimmering below. Isabella's eyes lowered to the drive in his hand. The truth she had ignored, the life she had shattered. Finally, David placed it on the railing between them. "Take it. It's yours. What you do with it will tell me who you are now." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "And Isabella," he said quietly, "next time you look down on someone, remember, they might be standing above you tomorrow." Then he was gone. She stayed on the terrace long after midnight, the ocean whispering below, the weight of 3 years pressing on her chest. For the first time in her life, Isabella Morrow felt powerless. Not because someone took her crown, but because someone showed her she never truly earned it. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the glass walls of Isabella's penthouse overlooking the V&A waterfront. The city below pulsed with color, fishermen pulling nets, tourists crowding the docks, seagulls cutting through the golden haze. But Isabella didn't notice any of it. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her silver laptop open in front of her. The small flash drive David had given her plugged into its side. For hours, she stared at lines of data, encrypted transfers, confidential emails, board documents, timestamp security footage. Each file she opened tore another piece from her carefully constructed memory of the past. Richard Hale had done it all. He had forged signatures, routed offshore accounts, manipulated audit logs, and worse, Isabella had helped him, unknowingly, by trusting him more than the man who had tried to warn her. David. There was one video file left. She hesitated before clicking play. The screen flickered. It showed David, in his old office at Morrow Industries, standing in front of her desk. The hidden camera, clearly placed by Richard, caught their last argument. "You're blind, Isabella," David's voice echoed from the speakers. "He's using your name, your access. You think he's protecting the company, but he's robbing it. Stop it, David," the Isabella on screen shouted. "You're obsessed. You're just jealous he believes in me more than you." The real Isabella closed her eyes, unable to watch herself sneer. On screen, David slammed a folder onto the table. "That's proof. Open it." "I'm done," the past Isabella said coldly. "You're suspended. Effective immediately." He stared at her for a long, heavy second. "One day you'll wish you had listened." Then the video cut off. The real Isabella sat frozen, trembling. The truth wasn't just data, it was a mirror. Every cruel word she'd thrown at him came back like thunder. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from a blocked number. "Still think you were the victim, I say?" "Yeah." Her heart stopped. Richard Hale. He was alive. By afternoon, she was driving along the coast road, wind tearing through her hair, the flash drive clutched in her hand. The GPS led her to a remote cliffside villa. The address David's assistant had listed as Coal Dynamics' local office. The property was minimal and modern, with glass walls that framed the endless sea. When she arrived, David was outside, barefoot, watering a row of potted plants. An image so ordinary it startled her. "Didn't think you'd actually come," he said without looking up. "I watched it," she said quietly. "The video, the transfers, all of it." He nodded once. "And," she hesitated, "you were right. I was wrong." "Good," he said simply. She frowned. "Is that it? You wanted me to crawl here and admit it?" David looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment, she saw something deeper than pride in his eyes. Something like sorrow. "No, Isabella," he said softly. "I wanted you to see it. That's different." She stepped closer, the ocean wind whipping her hair around her face. "You found Richard, didn't you?" His jaw tightened. "Not yet, but I know he's close. He's been moving money through shell fronts tied to Cape Town properties. I have people tracking him. And what if I told you he contacted me today?" David's head snapped up. "What did he say?" "Just one message. Still think you were the victim. No number. Just initials." He exhaled sharply. "Then he's watching you." He never stopped. A chill crept down her spine. David turned and walked toward the house. "Come inside. We'll trace the signal." Inside, the villa was minimalist. All white stone, glass, and humming tech equipment. Multiple screens displayed satellite data, offshore banking routes, and encrypted messages. "You built this?" Isabella asked. "From scratch," he said. "When I left the States, I swore I'd never let anyone blindside me again. Now I build systems that expose liars." She almost smiled. "You always did like poetic justice." He shot her a look. "Justice isn't poetic. It's expensive." She laughed despite herself. The tension between them softened slightly. For a brief moment, the ghosts of who they once were hovered in the room. colleagues, maybe even friends, before pride burned it all. Then one of the screens pinged. David's expression hardened. Signal traced. Western Cape Network. He's here. Somewhere along the coast. Isabella's voice trembled. If we find him, what will you do? David looked at her with eyes like steel. I'll make him tell the world the truth. And if he won't? He turned back to the glowing screens. Then I'll make sure he never ruins another life again. Hours later, night fell over Cape Town like velvet. The two of them sat side by side on the villa's balcony, laptops glowing faint blue against the dark. For the first time in years, they were allies. Isabella watched him quietly. You've changed, David. He smirked faintly. You haven't. I mean it, she said. You used to be all idealism and faith in people. Now you sound like a man who trusts no one. I learned the hard way, he said. People protect power, not truth. She lowered her gaze. You're right. The silence between them deepened. Not hostile this time, just heavy with unspoken history. Finally, she said, if you find Richard, let me be there. He studied her. Why? Because he didn't just ruin you. He ruined me too in a different way. I was his fool. I want to face him. David nodded slowly. Then you will. Later that night, when Isabella returned to her hotel, she stood at the mirror for a long time. The woman who stared back wasn't the queen of boardrooms or the face of Forbes covers. She was something rawer, a woman stripped of illusions. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. You shouldn't have gone to him. Aha. Attached was a photo. It showed her standing beside David's villa balcony, taken just hours ago. She dropped the phone, her heart pounding. He was watching them both. The next morning broke gray and restless. Clouds hung low over Table Mountain, and a mist rolled in from the sea, shrouding the coastline in silence. David woke early, his mind replaying Isabella's last message. He's watching us. He stood by the glass window, sipping black coffee, eyes fixed on the horizon. Somewhere out there, Richard Hale was alive, and closer than either of them had guessed. When Isabella arrived an hour later, she looked pale but resolute. She carried a small leather folder tucked under her arm. I didn't sleep, she said quietly. Neither did I. She placed the folder on the table between them. Inside were old corporate records, flight manifests, offshore transactions, surveillance files from Morrow Industries archives. I went through everything last night, she said. Look here, 3 months before the scandal, Richard made a series of private flights to South Africa. He was building something here even before the fall. David leaned over the papers, his eyes narrowing. So the fraud wasn't just about money. No, she said. It was about foundation. He was planting roots. This wasn't an escape. It was preparation. David frowned. For what? Before she could answer, one of his security monitors flickered. A car camera feed showed a black SUV parked down the hill, engine running. Company, Isabella whispered. David's tone sharpened. Uninvited. He moved quickly, shutting off the lights, opening a drawer, and pulling out a handheld scanner. Within seconds, a faint pulse filled the air. The device beeped red. Microsignal jammer, he said. We're being scanned. By who? He looked at her. Someone who doesn't want us finding Hale. Minutes later, they slipped out the back door into David's off-road Jeep, heading toward Chapman's Peak Drive. A winding cliff road carved between mountains and sea. The city fell away behind them, replaced by wild coastline. The Jeep hugged the narrow curves, tires crunching gravel as wind howled through the cliffs. Isabella held the folder tight in her lap, her knuckles white. You ever think about what you'd do if you saw him again? She asked. Highly. She nodded. David's jaw flexed. Every day for 3 years. But now that it's close, I don't know. I thought justice would feel cleaner than this. You're not alone in that. He glanced at her. Maybe not. But I'm the one who lost everything because you believed him. The words hit her like a blade. She turned toward the window, swallowing hard. I know. Silence filled the car. Only the crashing of waves below broke it. Then headlights. A black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror, closing in fast. David cursed. Hold on. The road narrowed sharply. The SUV accelerated. David! He swerved, tires screeching, narrowly missing the guardrail. The SUV rammed them from behind, sending metal grinding against stone. Who the hell are they? Isabella shouted. Not police, David said grimly. Hale's people. Another hit. The Jeep fishtailed dangerously near the cliff edge. Seat belt. David barked. She grabbed it just as the SUV pulled alongside. A man leaning out with something metallic. A tracking beacon. David slammed the brakes. The SUV shot forward, missing the curve, and disappeared over the edge. Silence. Then the distant echo of crashing steel far below. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The smell of burnt rubber filled the air. Isabella's chest heaved. Oh my God! David kept his hands on the wheel, his pulse pounding. Now you understand. He's not just hiding, he's hunting. He pulled the Jeep off the road and killed the engine. We can't go to the police, he said. They'll think we staged it. Hale has contacts everywhere. So what do we do? David looked at her with cold resolve. We become what he fears. They spent the next 12 hours in motion. Switching cars, burning phones, transferring data across encrypted networks. By nightfall, they arrived at a small township outside Stellenbosch. The wine country, quiet and serene beneath the stars. They checked into a modest guest house owned by one of David's local engineers. Inside, Isabella sat at the wooden desk, tracing a map with trembling fingers. All of these villas belonged to shell companies Hale once funded. But this one, she pointed to a remote estate near Hermanus. This one is still active. Electricity bills. Satellite feed. Someone's there. David leaned over her shoulder. We go tonight. She turned to him, eyes wary. And if it's a trap? He smiled faintly. Then we spring it first. By midnight, they reached the edge of the property. An isolated compound hidden by tall pines and electric fencing. David moved silently, crouched low as the wind hissed through the trees. Isabella followed, her breath visible in the cold. Through the binoculars, they saw it. The house lit from within, glass walls revealing shadows moving inside. One man, maybe two. David handed her a small earpiece. Stay behind me, no matter what happens. She nodded, heart hammering. They slipped through a breach in the fence and crept toward the rear of the house. A motion sensor blinked red. Then a voice behind them. Well, said a smooth, familiar tone. If it isn't my favorite mistake and her prodigal engineer. Isabella froze. Richard Hale stood a few feet away, dressed in black, a pistol gleaming at his side. He smiled. You really couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? David straightened, unflinching. 3 years. You stole everything. You ruined lives. Why? Hale's grin widened. Because I could. Because people like you think truth matters. Doesn't. Power does. Then you won't mind losing yours, David said. Hale tilted his head. Oh, David. Always the noble one. He glanced at Isabella. And you, my dear, still chasing absolution. Tell me, does he forgive you yet? Shut up, she whispered. Or what? He said, smirking. You'll destroy me? You couldn't even save yourself. David lunged. The gun fired, the sound thundered through the pines. Isabella screamed. Hale staggered back, clutching his shoulder, the gun clattering to the ground. David kicked it away, pinning him down. "Tell the truth," David said coldly. "On record. Right now." Hale laughed, blood staining his shirt. "You think anyone cares about truth? The world loves villains, they just wear suits." David's hand trembled. For a moment, the weight of 3 years pressed against his control. Then Isabella touched his arm. "Don't," she said softly. "He's not worth your soul." Their eyes met, hers full of tears, his burning with rage. Slowly, David released Hale and stepped back. Sirens wailed in the distance. "You called them?" he asked. She nodded. "I told the truth, David." Finally, police lights broke through the darkness. Hale, sneering and bleeding, was handcuffed and dragged away. As he passed Isabella, he hissed, "You think this changes anything?" She looked at him coldly. "It already has." Hours later, as dawn rose over the mountains, Isabella and David stood by the sea again. The same horizon that had once separated them. The wind was softer now, calmer. "3 years ago," she said, "I ruined you." He looked at her quietly. "No. You revealed me. I just didn't know who I was yet." Tears welled in her eyes. "Do you forgive me?" David smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't a gift. It's a release. And today, I let go." She nodded slowly. The sun climbed higher, bathing them both in gold. For the first time, there was no anger. Only peace, fragile but real. The sea was still glittering when the headlines broke. Financier Richard Hale arrested in South Africa. New evidence clears David Cole. Every news channel in Cape Town, London, and New York ran the story. The photos were everywhere. Hale in handcuffs, a blood-stained shirt clinging to him. Isabella Morrow standing behind the police tape, her expression unreadable. David didn't watch any of it. He was already in the back seat of a taxi, heading toward the airport. The morning light slid across his face as if trying to remind him that the world had changed. He had his freedom now. But peace? That was something else. 2 days later, he stood again in Atlanta. The city felt smaller somehow, the skyline grayer, the streets quieter than he remembered. His mother's house sat at the end of a narrow street lined with oak trees. The same front porch where she'd once held him after his release from jail now creaked beneath his steps. She opened the door before he could knock. No words, just an embrace that lasted longer than anything either of them had said in years. When she finally pulled back, she whispered, "I told you truth would come home." He smiled. It finally did. But he didn't tell her about the nights he still woke hearing gunshots, or the moments on the cliffs when rage nearly won. Some truths were heavier than vindication. Across the ocean, Isabella faced her own reckoning. The arrest had triggered a financial storm. Morrow Industries Board called an emergency meeting, cameras waiting outside like vultures. Every question was the same. How much did you know? Why did you defend him? Is it true Coal Dynamics now owns controlling shares? She answered calmly, each word measured. Morrow Industries failed because I failed to listen. I believed power protected me. Didn't. It blinded me. By the time the meeting ended, half the board had resigned. The rest voted to merge with Coal Dynamics under new leadership. When the cameras chased her into the street, one reporter asked, "Is this the end of Isabella Morrow?" She paused, turned slightly, and said, "No, it's the beginning of who I should have been." Then she walked away from the microphones and didn't look back. Weeks later, an email arrived in David's inbox. No subject line, just one line in the body. If you ever plan to build something new, I'd like to help, not as a partner, but as someone who finally understands what loyalty means. Isabella. He stared at the message for a long time before replying. Meet me where it all ended. The air in Cape Town was cooler this time, gentler. He waited by the same terrace overlooking the bay, the one where years ago he'd left her with a flash drive and a warning. She arrived in a simple white dress. No entourage, no jewelry, no armor. When she smiled, it wasn't the calculated charm of a businesswoman. It was quiet, honest. You came back, he said. I had to, she replied. You said once that truth circles back. I wanted to see where it landed. They walked the terrace in silence for a while, the sea below whispering its endless rhythm. You built something good, she said softly. Coal Dynamics. It's helping communities now, education, infrastructure. You turned revenge into repair. He shrugged. Maybe that's the only way to make the pain worth something. She looked out at the horizon. Do you ever wish things had gone differently? He thought for a long moment. If they had, I wouldn't know who you really are, or who I am. A small smile touched her lips. Then maybe we found the right ending after all. They sat as the sun dipped low, turning the ocean into a sheet of molten copper. The world seemed quieter, lighter. Finally, Isabella said, I know you said forgiveness isn't a gift, but for what it's worth, I forgive myself. For the first time. David turned to her. Then you've learned what I was trying to say. What's that? That grace doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. She looked at him, eyes bright. And what about us? He smiled faintly. Maybe the world doesn't need another story about love and betrayal. Maybe it needs one about two people who survived both. Months later, David received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photo, two children in a village school wearing Cole Foundation shirts, grinning at the camera, and a note in Isabella's handwriting. We can't rewrite our first story, but maybe we can build one worth telling next time. He placed the letter beside the window. Outside, the sun rose over Atlanta again, and for the first time in years, it felt like a beginning. When pride meets grace, no one walks away unchanged. Power may build empires, but truth rebuilds people. And sometimes, redemption doesn't come as applause. It comes as silence, shared between two souls who finally understand the cost of grace.